Hello, and welcome to another video. In this video, we're going over some Plasmatech gameplay. In this video, I'm like literally the only frontline for my entire team. So I'm going to be taking a massive amount of damage. We're also against a relatively large pre-made. And for the luck that I've drawn, they happen to mostly be playing dots. Plasmatech is like the best class against other dot players because you get 30% dot damage reduction. You also have high armor, and you have access to power yield for 30 seconds, which increased or further increased armor. So you actually have a lot of damage reduction. Then you also get culto. So anytime you're hit by like each number splat, so like let's say somebody cools me, my cooldown reduction for culto would go crazy. So feel free to watch that in, like in the middle of the match. So this makes me incredibly tanky. So when my culto actually procs, and it's going, I have 30% damage reduction on top of that. Then obviously I have energy shield, and during energy shield I have CC immune. So I kind of can't be playing a better melee into this. If I was playing anything else, I'd probably die a lot faster and my team would get destroyed. But because I am ever so tanky and relatively a good melee class to go into this, it's like worked to my favor a little bit here. But also very experienced on class and very experienced with Pyro in general, so it definitely helps a lot that I actually know what I'm doing. Anyway, getting into this, I wanted to explain a couple things just so you guys understand like what's happening here. So there's a lot of range, and I can use the sides to line of sight like a lot. I can even use the pillars to line of sight. I do it quite often. Unfortunately, there is a tank, and the tank has no like interest in really protecting me all that much. He occasionally protects me, but most of the time it doesn't. So ultimately, if you actually want to play like in a good way, if you want to take advantage of like your range ability and taking advantage of like your healing and just trying to stay in line of sight, but also like still have like protection. So for example, the tank could be doing the same thing that I'm doing. He could line of sight but still guard. The healers should never be out in the open. The healers should never be like standing there. It's the main reason why this match is even as close as it is because our healers are just standing there. Most of our range are just standing there with no like intent on actually line of sight. So there is a good amount of damage that's actually split between me and other people. These other people could take so much like less damage if they just didn't stand out in the open, but unfortunately they do, especially the healer. No offense to them, obviously they keep me alive, and I do appreciate that. But if you guys really did want to like understand like how to play frontline and like team strategy and stuff like that, you would never be standing out in the open in a situation like this. Ancient Hypergate favors range like drastically. So where would you want to stand if you're a healer? Well, if you have a frontline at all, you are basically relying on your frontline to basically survive. So you're like other people aren't like actually taking that much damage. So your range shouldn't be taking that much damage. So you should be standing behind the cube or close to the cube as you can, so you can line of sight if you do get hit, or either side pillar. By side pillar, I mean the things that I've been using to line of sight. So I'll go to the left or the right. Either area like that, closer to the wall, means the further they have to come in to hit me, and that's the more objects that I have to like line of sight them. Also, they overextend a little bit, which means the range on your team, depending on the positioning, can easily hit them. Because when they're on this platform and they start going downhill, it becomes a lot harder for them to hit us back, but it also becomes a lot harder for us to hit them because we have to overextend, since their classes are decently immobile. It's not always a great idea. Anyway, getting into like priorities, at least for Pyro, really all you're doing is scorching everybody, incendiary missile into a searing wave, which is basically my Q into my 3. Punch on cooldown whenever there's AoE. And roll shot whenever it's procced, and that's literally it. Pyro is probably one of the most simplistic classes and specs to play in the entire game. It's nowhere near as hard as anybody says. I know the PvPers say it's hard or whatever, it's harder in AP. It's completely wrong. This class is like comparable to, I would say, Madness. Not like the class as a whole, but like the spec and doing damage on it, I would compare it to Madness. Like, it's not a difficult thing, it's not very thought-provoking, there's not really anything to it, really. But when it comes to like AP, you know, at least you got a couple things going on that you have to keep track of. Obviously in PvE it's probably less so that way, but for the most part, neither are really that hard to play. So that means you can spend all your time pretty much paying attention to what's going on, and also just generally keeping your eyes in the middle of the screen. If you guys didn't know, my eyes are always in the middle of the screen. My peripheral vision is able to see my abilities. Every now and then I will look down, but not very often. So I'm usually always like visually looking at the center of my screen. Ultimately, if I had the option to have like a cooldown tracker, I would just make a cooldown tracker and put it on the left side of my screen. So usually where my flight text is showing up on the left hand side. Sometimes it's on the right, it really just depends which way you're walking. That's where I would have my cooldown tracker, so like it wouldn't show up if it's available, and if it was available, it would show me the cooldown on the left hand side and have it faded. That would be what I would want. It's kind of like how BDO does it. I really do enjoy BDO, and it's usually the warm-up game that I'll play before I get into Star Wars. If I'm ever not playing Star Wars, I usually play that game. Just to adjust myself to something fast, or more fast-paced, so I don't really have an issue adjusting to Star Wars. Now, getting into a couple other things. If you're curious about positioning, obviously there's a range. Let's say you're on the other team. Standing right here is really big. It gives you very little options to hit, so it's obvious that I'm going to get hit here. So there's not really anybody else for them to hit, so obviously I'm going to get hit. That's fine, I have Colto. I barely survive mostly because the healer is just, you know, it's not as extended. Where the healer is standing right now is not completely optimal. If they're a little bit more close to the left, like where I am, that would be an optimal position. If healers like stand there, or range in general stand there, that's a really good spot, not only to the line of sight, but also back up your melee that's pushing, and it also keeps the melee in range, so if you do need to throw a diversion, you do need to throw like anything to support them, like if they get jumped by melee, or they get jumped by like a lot of people, you can actually still support them and still see them. And if need be, you can push a little bit further, and you can always go back. And if they push in, chances are you already know that the melee is still there, so the melee can probably do something about that. And if they can't, it's not too hard for you to run behind the cube, because you have a lot of, usually, mobility, because you haven't had to use this entire match. So where my team is currently standing is a little bit more optimal for me, which is great. Unfortunately, I am dead, mostly because I got stuck by the Juggernaut. Juggernaut used like all of his CC on me, so there's nothing I could really do movement-wise. The tank could have came closer to actually put me in guard range, but instead he kind of like just didn't. So like as a tank, for example, you have to be within 10 meters to have your guard active. So if he was to stay even out of line of sight, so closer to the pillar on the left or right, he would still be able to effectively guard me. Instead, he decided not to do that, which is okay. I don't really expect anything out of pugs. You know, I'm just solo queuing into a larger crewmate. It's to be expected. I didn't expect to play against these guys, but it just happened. And unfortunately, playing against something like this as Pyro, like my ability to get kills is not very high. I'm really reliant on my other classes like helping me out, and unfortunately the Marauders kind of like found me, and Marauder, as Carnage at least, my defenses don't really do anything against him, so he's like shredding me for raw damage. Arsenal is like the other class that does that, so like PT, VG, very like kind of weak against Arsenal and Carnage. It's always kind of been that way. Not like before Pyro, but since Pyro exists, pretty much all of Pyro can get ignored by those two classes, and that makes you significantly more like squishy. So I do ask for some help, because I mean, like, their entire team is telling me if they want me to survive like at all, the Marauder has to die. He has to not be on me. If he's on me, he needs to die. Also, them not having predation means that their mobility is scuffed, and it helps us, you know, win a lot better. As you can see, like, my health is fine, and then as it's on me, like, I'm getting shredded. It's mostly just because there's a lot of armor penetration. And also I have dot TRs, so that obviously just makes me naturally tanky against the other dot players. So like where the healer is currently standing is a good position if I have to push back. And then if I'm able to push them forward, the left hand side kind of like where my DPS is. Obviously not that far back, because if you're that far back, you're making yourself a bigger target. If you're closer to the wall, you can even climb up on these cubes, which is why I call them like towers, or I guess walls or whatever. You can actually climb on these cubes. You can actually get to the top of these cubes. You can actually get to a position on that cube where you can kind of like deny vision, but also still use it to like see your own allies if they're close enough, which is kind of interesting. But as you saw, I just jumped on it a little bit. But you can actually get on the second tier of that cube, if I remember correctly. And there's even a spot that you can get all the way up to the top. It's like the 4th tier or whatever. It's pretty high up. I don't remember if it still hides your name tag. I don't think it does, but that's a place I use to regen a lot, especially if I get out of combat. But as you can see, when he's about to, you know, he hit me like twice. Like my health is going up. I'm being healed. I had Coplo at least, and I was still getting shred. So yeah, definitely Carnage is a threat. If you ever want to kill Pyro, or like PT in general, Carnage and we're still really good at it. But other than that, my class choice is like really good against this team. Now that I've kind of like explained the team strategy and stuff, and like where they should be positioning and stuff, there's another thing that I want to like explain, because I realized I didn't, and it's probably kind of important for some of you guys because you probably don't know anything about it. But when it comes to like a more team-based like fighter, or like at least fight like this in general, is that you have a front line, right? And without a front line, your back line gets hit all the time. Your back line is usually your damage. Melee and range in this game are quite a bit different. A lot of melee have defensives that are used while they're still doing damage. There's a lot of defenses for, depending on which range you're playing, require you to be more actively like using them, more like casting, channeling heals and stuff like that. Require you to be a little more safe. You're doing less damage if you're using it, basically. As the expansions have gone on, that's become less and less the case. But for example, obviously Frontline is going to take most of the damage, take most of the CC. It's basically at the front of everything. So this means usually their defenses are going to be better because they don't have a way to heal, and they don't have a way to sufficiently deal with most of the stuff that's going to be coming their way anyway. So with that knowledge, obviously, unfortunately we got pushed back here, and they're like playing pretty aggressively, but their healer gets pretty low, so it means as long as my team does some damage, we can push them back. You always want to keep your front line alive, basically. That's what I'm saying. If your front line falls and you've got a lot of backline, even if the backline's like not good, as long as they know how to hit DPS buttons, and you keep your front line alive, you can pretty much pressure the enemy team into submission, which is great. But let's say as soon as your front line dies, who else is going to get hit? Probably the healer or the DPS. DPS get healed or hit, and they're not very good at like dealing with pressure. Chances are they're going to do no damage and die. That's going to create a spiral, I guess, domino effect, and your entire team's kind of basically going to fall. And unless there's like tanks and heals that are like sufficient, it's going to cause a lot of issues. And this is kind of like how like tides are turned sometimes in like team fights. So like Juggernauts in the beginning, they're very strong because they have all the defensives, but when their defensives are on the cooldown, like that second round of like combat, they kind of like fall off defensively, and then they come back. And when they have their defensive back, they get like a power spike and like defensive capability, so obviously they last longer and they can push back and kind of win. And then once they lose those, they can get pushed back over. It kind of goes back and forth, back and forth. Some of the classes just have defenses that are like that. And Juggernaut, I would say, is probably the best example of this. So it's definitely something that you want to think about. Obviously, frontline, most important to keep alive if you don't want to take damage. And on top of that, when your frontline is being like the target, you want to optimize your damage, try to do as much damage as you can. Think of it like this, like let's say we're playing an FPS game. Somebody comes around the corner, they see me first, and they want to shoot me. So they're going to shoot me, and when we engage in our gunfight, we're going to take shots at each other. Let's say there's a third person there. That third person is not going to get shot. So you should definitely try to take advantage of that instead of try to hide because like, oh, this guy just spotted you. Well, he's too busy shooting somebody else. Think of it that way. Anyway, hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day.